Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, with gratitude, I welcome everyone to this episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for locking in, whether you're watching, whether you're listening, whether you're following, subscribing. I appreciate y'all very, very much. This is our Thursday podcast drop episode. Want to let you know, before anything else, tonight, depending on when you're listening to this on Thursday, tonight, meaning Thursday night, live from Imperial Pizza, I am going to be joined by Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic, Buffalo Sabres beat reporter for The Athletic. And boy, oh boy, are we going to have some things to talk about. I'll tell you what, I booked that show with Matt for Imperial several weeks ago. Did not know at the time that we'd be talking a Buffalo Sabres head coach firing, who may be the head coach. So needless to say, that should be a really good conversation with Matthew, and that'll be for tomorrow's show. If you happen to be out in the area, South Buffalo area, Thursday night, gonna converge with Matt around 7-ish, do the show around 8 o'clock. It'll stream live on the YouTube side. If you happen to be in that neighborhood, stop out, say hello to us. Love to see you. As for today's episode, gonna kind of break this down into two halves. So I'm going to spend some time giving you my thoughts on the Buffalo Sabres firing Don Granato, because I thought it was a pretty big surprise. Maybe it should have been, but for at least me, it was for sure. So I got some thoughts on that. And then in the back half of this episode, I've come up with 8 names that are not first round prospects that I think would be really strong fits for the Buffalo Bills on day 2 or day 3 of the draft. Guys that, if Brandon Beane calls their name, I would be very, very happy to see play for the Buffalo Bills this year. So that's going to be today's show. Like I said, tomorrow we'll be live with Matt Fairburn. Let's just jump right into it. I don't want this to be a particularly long episode today. In terms of the Buffalo Sabres, look, Don Granato got fired. A bit of a shocker, I feel like, comes down early Tuesday morning. Maybe a lot of it a shocker, not just a little bit. The Sabres put out a press release and they announced that Don Granato has been relieved of his head coaching duties, along with an assistant coach and a video coordinator. Don't remember those names offhand. But I'll tell you what, I was getting ready to tape a Bills mock draft episode with Aaron Quinn from Cover One. First time I've had him on the show, by the way, in 7 months. And that news came down like quite literally just minutes before the mock. And again, caught me off guard. Had me distracted at least for the first few minutes of the episode. And, with that goes Don Granato and his 122, 125, 27 record, 273 games as Sabres head coach, the 6th longest tenured coach in the NHL at the time of his firing, and one of, among several dubious distinctions for Granato, he has coached, let me make sure I got the stat right for you guys, the 7th most games in NHL history without a single playoff game. That is crazy, because I got to tell you, in some ways, it almost feels like yesterday when Don Granato was the interim coach, promoted to head coach, got an extension. And to hear that stat, the 7th most games in NHL history without a single playoff game. Wow. So, the reasons for Granato's dismissal are plentiful. This was a team that came into this season having every expectation of being a playoff team in 2023, 2024. And rightfully so. I mean, this is a team that finished just 2 points out last season. They played meaningful games last season all the way up to game 81, the second last game of the year, before they finally got eliminated. Fans in Buffalo put expectations on them, rightfully so again. People around the league put expectations on them. And most importantly, I think, and now it's pretty obvious, ownership and management in the Sabres organization put that expectation on them. And they didn't play up to it. Did not play up to it, not by a long shot. So pressure, youth, lack of accountability, whatever you want to call it what you will. But the 2023-2024 Buffalo Sabres were the epitome this past year of what being an underachiever is, what underachieving is. That was the Buffalo Sabres, especially in the first few months of the season when they dug a hole that they just could not climb out of. I feel like I can go on for hours or even days about, the problems that I had with this year's Sabres team. And in fairness to Don Granato, okay, let me put this out here too. In fairness to Don Granato, this ain't all on him. It's just not on him. Like the Buffalo Sabres being a huge disappointment to the fans of the organization is not all on Don Granato. I want to make that real clear. This is very much on the players as well. This is very much on Kevin Adams, the general manager. This is on Don Granato's assistants. Hell, this is pretty much on, to some extent at least, everyone in the entire Buffalo Sabres organization. But the single biggest thing, and to me, this falls on coaching and coaching leadership, is that this team this year, the Buffalo Sabres, just, man, they flat out did not come out of the locker room ready to play. Too many nights that happen. I mean, it happens to the best of teams. You catch a team on the second of back-to-back, or just one of those nights where you just don't seem to have that energy coming out of the locker room, getting onto the ice. I get it. It happens to a lot of teams, but it happened to the Sabres as much or maybe more than anybody in the NHL this year. The Sabres were the worst team in the entire NHL. The entire NHL when it came to the first period, allowing goals in the first period. They gave up 97 goals in the opening 20 minutes. Again, dead last in the entire league. They were outscored by 30 in the first period alone. And when you get to this level, the highest level of hockey in the world, it's tough to dig yourself out of a hole, man, when you're in a deficit in the National Hockey League almost all the time. You come out, you play like shit in the first period, you dig yourself a hole, you're just begging for bad things to happen. And to make matters worse, 29 times this season, they gave up at least 2 or more goals in the first period. So if you sit there, you do the math, 29 times, 82 games, which, by the way, actually improved late in the season, or it might have even been worse. But nearly 36% of the time this season, when you took the ice, you're the Buffalo Sabres, you take the ice, you come out of the locker room, you take the ice, 20 minutes, you go in for first intermission, and you've given up multiple goals in the first period, 29 times. That is just ridiculous. That's so bad. Like I said, I'm certainly not going to exonerate the players for sleepwalking at the start of way too many games this year. But whether it's, getting the team to change their approach mentally, maybe how they're preparing physically, their routines, their habits, whatever, maybe throwing in a big rah-rah speech or whatever it takes, man. A good NHL caliber coach is having his team come out of that locker room ready to play most nights. It did not happen enough here, and especially at home. I mean, last year when they almost made the playoffs, this year when they kind of flirted a little bit here and there in making the playoffs, there's a team that just did not play well at home. They were better on the road, which tells you pressure. This team just did not handle the pressure of playing well at home, which again, to me, falls on the sword. Not entirely just because of him, but primarily on the sword of the head coach. And after finishing last year, 91 points, and again, just 2 points out of being in the playoffs. The Buffalo Sabres came out this season with all those expectations, and they played at a 73-point pace through the first 3 months of the season. 73-point pace. October, November, December, 73 points. That is just absolutely pathetic, man. That is pathetic. Don Granato Sabres they're also a team that they just simply they get momentum sometimes, but they could just never sustain the momentum that they gained. They never, throughout the entire season, did not have better than a 3-game winning streak. And I'm talking about for the entire season. They did not have a 4-game winning streak once this year. And I'm pretty sure they only had 2 3-game winning streaks. Which, by the way, they went through almost 50 games before they even had one of those as well. So they just couldn't sustain momentum. And, so not only did they too often come out like zombies to start games, they got incredibly tight, if not full on gag mode when things started to get close. And if you want evidence of that, the Sabres eventually climbed back into at least being in like the playoff conversation and the maybe the brink of the playoff picture, the wild card spot. But 6 times they played where they were within 4 points of a wild card spot, and 6 times they lost. 6 regulation losses too. 0 and 6 when within 4 points of a wild card spot. That's playing tight, right? That's gagging, man. We use that term all the time in sports. They gagged. Team, they choked. And sometimes that could get overblown. This team went 0 and 6. They literally win a game. If that's not gagging, what is? They just weren't that good in close, especially close games too. Not even within 4 points of a playoff spot. I'm talking about just close games, period. They were 11 and 6 in 1-goal games for the entire season. That's a winning percentage of just 38%. Again, not good enough. And of course, anyone with a pair of eyeballs that, if you could see, you look at the games, you could see the power play, just an absolute freaking unmitigated disaster. 28th in the league. And man, just not good enough. Then there's the players. Too many star players on this hockey team just straight up regressed from last year. Tage Thompson went from 47 goals and 94 points last year to just 29 goals, 56 points this year. Alex Tuck, 36 goals, 79 points last year, just 22 and 59 this year. Dylan Cousins, who quite frankly I thought was kind of awful for a lot of the year. Big stretches where I thought Dylan Cousins belonged in the press box as much as he belonged on the second line. He had 31 goals last year, 68 points. This year, 18 goals, 47 points. All 3 of those guys, 3 key guys, 2 of them signed to long-term deals, core players on this hockey team. They all scored 20 points or less than they did last year. And it's just not good enough, man. So, I can sit here and blame Don for so many things, but this is also on the players too. And I think kind of on Wednesday, there's 2 days when you're hearing this, the second day of locker cleanout should be going on. You hear from more players, but that's kind of the theme in the locker room that, we didn't do our job. We weren't good enough. Also talking about needing leadership and accountability, and they're ready for it. Should have been ready for it this year. That's a separate rant. Don't get me going on that. But, how much of the players, the stars regressing, how much of that is being bothered by injury? How much of that is maybe the players just get too comfortable? They get content and they're satisfied with what they did last year. How How much of that is like just a straight up lack of accountability? Whether it's from the head coach, I don't know. Not sure. But there's no doubt that the coach does deserve at least some of the blame for these guys, for Tuck, for Tage, for Cousins, for some other guys who just weren't good enough this year. Sure, primarily it is on the players, but to some extent, at least, is on the head coach. As for like a couple specific games, a couple specific incidences, I would say, Lance Lazowski of the Buffalo News, he wrote about Granato's firing, and I read the article. Of course, I read it. He hit the nail right on the head. He pointed out 3 games that ultimately doomed Don Granato. One of them, you'd have to go back to a couple days before Christmas. It was December 19th. The Columbus game at home. They got shellacked by a shitty Columbus team, 9-4, and the crowd was saying, they were chanting, "Fire Donnie" at some point. And that's something that apparently the players never really got over. That really bothered them, not as much as it bothered the fans watching that crap game, but fire Donnie from the fans. It had to resonate with Pagula and Adams and all these guys, in the organization. Another game that Lance wrote about was when they allowed 6 straight goals to the Edmonton Oilers. It was an 8-3 loss. The Sabres were up by a goal with like a minute left in the second period, gave up 6 straight goals, ended up getting their asses whooped 8-3. Just an embarrassing loss. And then maybe the most embarrassing of all, them kind of creeping back into the playoff race at home, playing the Ottawa Senators, and they lose 5-0. Or I'm sorry, they didn't lose 5-0. They gave up 5 goals in the first period and went to the locker room down 5-0. Just an absolute embarrassment, a laugher. Fans laughing at this team when they weren't booing them last month in Buffalo. I'm sure those had plenty to do with the organization, the top brass, their decision. And I also thought it was telling, maybe potentially dooming, maybe potentially very dooming, that when Casey Middlestat got traded to Colorado, Casey Middlestat, a great player this year, I'm not going to criticize the trade because I think Kevin Adams realized he might not be able to sign Casey Middlestat long term. It's not that they didn't like the player, that they didn't want to keep him, but you're talking about long-term dollars and cents. So they traded him to Colorado. They got a good defensive player for him in return. So I'm not bashing the trade whatsoever. But what I am saying, Casey Middlestat goes to Colorado, and like literally after his first practice, he tells the media there that he's never sweated like that. He's never had a sweat like that before at a practice. And he made the Sabres practice seem like a walk in the park by comparison. I bet you that didn't sit well with the Sabres. Management, ownership. Speaking of ownership, tell you, as far as Terry Pegula goes, I want to give him some credit right now. I'm going to give some credit to Terry Pegula. It's easy to blast Terry about everything most of the time, and a lot of it's, quite warranted, but I'm going to give credit where it's due right here. I mean, he's eating Don Granato's extension. He's paying him close to $4 million now to not be the head coach of this hockey team. And I feel like when you look at this team this season, especially if you really followed along closely to the Buffalo Sabres this year, I feel like it would have been easy to write the season off to bad luck, to injuries. Honestly, it wouldn't have been a completely absurd excuse either if you really think about it. I mean, Jack Quinn was hurt not once, but twice, significant injuries. Only played 27 out of 82 games for the Sabres this year. And it's not even debatable. This lineup is different when Jack Quinn is out there and he's healthy. He had 19 points in 27 games, and he made that second line a lot better, a lot more formidable. So that's not nothing. Talk about so many star players and their regression statistically this year. Some of it, at least, is because of injuries, I'm sure. Tage Thompson missed 11 games, and it was pretty obvious he was trying to play hurt. He was playing through it. Alex Tuck missed 7 games. He was banged up a lot. Jeff Skinner led the team in goals. I think he did. Maybe he didn't. Anyway, regardless, he missed 8 games this year. Owen Power missed 6 games. Matthias Samuelsson, a guy that the Sabres gave a long-term contract to, he missed quite literally half the season. These are many of their best players, their core players. And on a young team, especially like this one, I think that injuries were a legitimate factor. To some extent, at least. I think they were for sure. So it would be easy to blame that. It would be easy for Terry Pegula to say, his GM didn't do a good enough job this past summer, didn't give his coach enough help. Not suggesting that Terry Pegula would or should fire Kevin Adams at this point, but it could be a big check mark against him. He didn't. Maybe that helps give Don Granato a pass for this year. Sells you on, we could have gotten better during the offseason. We didn't make enough moves. We didn't do whatever. Let's give Donnie another year. Then if we start slow, then maybe we'll get rid of him. Because Kevin Adams did not have a good summer. All right, Kevin Adams added Eric Johnson and Connor Clifton to that blue line over the summer, and that was a disaster. Well, at least Eric Johnson completely was, man. Great player, great career, but he was completely washed here in Buffalo. I think Kevin Adams put too much stock into his current roster. He didn't find anyone to take Jack Quinn's spot, which, I will say, in fairness to him, and he explained this at his press conference, I think there's some truth to what he was saying. It's not like they didn't make efforts to do something, and he also didn't expect Jack Quinn to get hurt a second time. That is a very fair response from Kevin Adams. It's been widely reported that they did take a run at Pat Kane. Pat Kane chose Chicago. So what are you going to do? And these were all big factors. So I guess, is this all Don Granato's fault? No. I just said that already. I'm certainly not going to put anything before this season on Don Granato for sure. We talk about the 13-year historic playoff drought. That's not all on Don Granato. And I'd say anything before this season, not his fault at all. I mean, he inherited a pretty shitty roster when he became head coach. And I think he made some strides. I think he did a good job in some ways, at least last year, getting some of these young players to that next level. I think there's some young guys on this team who developed nicely under Don Granato, and maybe they would have with a different head coach during Don's run here. And also, this team was almost there just 2 years ago. Sabres went 16-9-3, 16-9-3 down the stretch last year to almost make the playoffs. And there were at least, a couple, even this year, as underwhelming as this year was, as disappointing. There are a couple bright spots on this team that you got to give Granato some credit for. JJ Peterka went from just 12 goals last year to 28 this year. And despite it taking too long, Granato eventually got him on that top line with Tuck and Tage, which is something I certainly see going forward, whoever's going to be the next coach. I thought UPL was absolutely fantastic in that, especially after New Year's. The Sabres may have found themselves now a legit modified 1-2 punch between him and Devin Levi going forward. And Zach Benson, 18-year-old rookie, scores 10 goals. I don't feel like there was too much pressure put on him too early, kind of ease his way into a more prominent role as an 18-year-old rookie. So, look, I'm sure Don helped his game come along real nice. But let's not forget at the end of the day, man, we're talking 13 years and no playoffs, including the past 3 full seasons with Don Granato being behind the bench. It's embarrassing. And the funny thing is, you're not talking about winning a cup. You're not talking about even winning a couple rounds in the playoffs. You're talking about getting into the playoffs. Making the playoffs doesn't even mean that you're one of the best teams in the NHL. I mean, for Christ's sake, it just means you're among the top half of the league in your own conference. That's it. You're one of the better teams in your conference, the top half. That's it. That's what it takes to get in the playoffs. And for 13 years, including 3+ now with Granato, it didn't happen. So I guess to close here, the question is, who's next? And I ain't going to sit here and try to pretend like I can offer a lot of insight as to who Terry Pegula should hire. I don't know. I ain't that guy. Chad DeMonitis is that guy. Joe Yern is that guy. Mike Carrington's that guy. Lance Lazowski's that guy. Rachel Hotmeyer's that girl. Not me. I don't know. I don't know about specific coaches. What I do know is that this team needs badly a strong like disciplinarian type of figure as a coach more than anything else. Someone who's going to force accountability, somebody who's going to throw Dylan Cousins on the fourth line for stretches if he plays like he did this season, somebody who's going to give Hayden Krebs a seat in the press box for stretches when it's warranted, someone who isn't going to force Eric Johnson on the ice for dozens of games, even though he was completely washed and it was obvious just because, the GM signed him. Sounds like an old retread coach to me. And generally I hate that shit. I really truly do. But in this case, I think that's what I think they need that. I think that's what is needed. Um, it certainly sounds like Kevin Adams knows that. That press conference was really telling. It was crystal clear. He pretty much said he has a plan, and that's where he's going. And I'll tell you what, I have no inside information. This isn't, anything other than me playing my hunches. But man, boy, oh boy, did it ever sound like Kevin Adams was talking about Lindy Ruff at his press conference on Tuesday. Apparently Bruce Bordeaux could be a candidate, maybe Craig Berube. I've heard Mike Sullivan of the Penguins could be the guy if Pittsburgh decides to move on for him. I think he's been there for like 10 years. Again, I got no idea. But I expect someone sooner than later, going by the way that Kevin Adams sounded on Tuesday. And I'm actually, again, pleasantly shocked that Terry Bagula pulled the trigger, that he signed off on this. I really, truly am. Anyway, on that note, take a quick break, come back, and we're going to talk 8 non-first round prospects that I really like for the Buffalo Bills. All right, I am back. First half of this show, we talked Don Granato getting fired. My thoughts, my commentary on that. A pretty surprising move, at least to me it was anyway. The NFL draft now, we are a week away, and I'm not that dumb. I'm dumb, but I'm not that dumb. I know the vast majority of people who listen to this show regularly are here for Buffalo Bills, and more specifically for some Bills draft talk. And look, when we do these mock drafts, when we talk just the draft in general, whether it's here, whether it's most shows, besides the quick little mock draft episodes that a lot of people do, but it's mainly about the first round guys. Like I feel like even the casual fan, maybe a little bit more than the casual fan, but not the hardcore fan, the fans that know about the prospects, primarily it's the first round guys, and then it falls off to some extent afterwards. So what I wanted to do on the back half of this episode today, and I'm not going to have no long diatribe about any of these guys, but I've been spending a lot of time reading up on prospects, watching as many highlight tapes as I can, reading people, putting stock into opinions, in the draft industry that I truly respect. And I kind of come up with a list of 8, and there's more than 8, but I just want to limit this to 8 today. 8 non-first round prospects that I really like. And I'm pretty confident that none of these guys will go in the first round. So some of them, and they're in no specific order. Like I don't have them like power ranked or anything like that. Could be guys in day 2, second, maybe third rounders. And we got a couple likely, fourth or fifth round guys on this list as too. And again, I'm doing these in random order, not by an order of how I like them as Buffalo Bills, potential Buffalo Bills. But anyway, I want to start with defensive tackle Chris Jenkins from Michigan. Again, I'm not going to make a lot of these explanations very long. Not a very accomplished pass rusher at Michigan, but this kid is a pretty complete player. He's 6'3", 305 pounds. I feel like he can eventually be your DeQuan Jones replacement. DeQuan Jones, 32 years old, 2-year contract. Who knows? Maybe that ends up being in reality a 1-year contract, kind of like Jordan Poyer when he signed a 2-year deal last offseason. PFF's analysis of him says pound for pound, he may be the strongest player in this entire draft class. Now, he doesn't have like the highest ceiling. Like he ain't going to be the next Chris Jones or anything like that. But he's got a high floor. Like the bust level on him is really low. Like it would be a big surprise if he didn't become at least a good player in the NFL. And he's also, and I know this matters, especially with the Buffalo Bills, he's a high character dude, man. You know, that's something Sean McDermott absolutely loves, which to be fair, as he should. You know, Chris Shank is a two-time, or I should say a 2-year captain at Michigan, second round guy, third or fourth on most draft boards that I've seen. Byron Murphy, Johnny Newton, those guys are pretty much 1 and 2 every year. And then on a lot of them, you see Jenkins third. Hoping he falls to you at 60, though, might be a bit of a stretch. And you might have to move up a little bit to go get him. But, you know, he might be worth it. Again, with DaQuan Jones a little bit long in the tooth. As much as I love DaQuan Jones, that's no indictment on DaQuan Jones. I'm all about DaQuan Jones. Shit. My Bills offseason priority episodes, quite literally my first priority going into this offseason before it even began, was go get DaQuan Jones back. Go re-sign him. But anyway, with him getting a little bit, like I said, long in the tooth and really wanting to upgrade the depth at defensive tackle, this could be a really, really good fit for the Buffalo Bills. He's also got some really good NFL bloodlines in him. His dad had a great 10-year career in the league as well. So that's a dude that I really like a lot. It just makes a lot of sense to me. Another guy, Cooper Beebe, a guard from Kansas. You know, I just did a mock draft with Aaron Quinn this week and nearly in our mock draft ran to the podium to go get this guy when we were on the clock near the end of the third round, I think it was. He was still there, which, by the way, that was a pick we got in a trade down from 28. You should go back and watch that. Check out that podcast I did with Aaron Quinn, that mock. That was a lot of fun, really informative. Went through a lot of potential trade, move up, trade, move down scenarios. Really good stuff. But anyway, look, he's nowhere, near the most like athletic interior offensive lineman in this draft, but his football smarts off the charts. He's 6'4", 335 pounds. Your boy is all man. All man. Reading up on him from The Athletic, Dane Brugler writes, he doesn't have the idea arm length he talked about, that most teams desire, but he's a stout dude. He's controlled, plays with power. I feel like this is a guy you can get somewhere on day 2. Now, look, the Bills don't have a third rounder as things stand. And again, in our mock draft, I believe we took him in the third round because of some trades that we make. But as things stand right now, the Bills do not have a third round pick. So this could require some real life maneuvering, not just, fan mock draft maneuvering. But man, oh man, you'll get a guy like Cooper Beebe and you could have like a legit challenger for David Edwards right off the bat to start a guard. I mean, from like day 1 of training camp. And I know some people out there are going to be, well, we don't need a guard. Not this year. We signed Leo Collins. I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that. In no way, shape, or form is the addition of Collins and his practically non-guaranteed contract going to stop Brandon Beane from finding an interior offensive lineman who's got starting potential, who at worst, should be really, really good depth. Best case, you draft somebody like him and you find this year's Osiris Torrance, beyond the first round. Last year, the Bills they drafted Torrance in round 2. Day 1, week 1, Torrance is your starting guard. Maybe lightning could strike twice. And even better, maybe it could strike with you getting BB somewhere in the third round somehow. I don't even know you need to get him in the second round, although he could go in the second round, but probably more likely the third. Man, I would love that signing. I just think it makes a lot of sense. I think it would be a good addition to the football team. And again, a non-first round guy who could come in right away and legitimately compete for a starting job. Next guy up, Cole Bishop, a safety from Utah, is another guy I really like, and also another guy that Aaron Quinn and I mocked to the Bills in Talking Buffalo's latest mock draft. A guy being in favor of ringing that Utah bell for back-to-back years. Of course, the Bills plucked Dalton Kincaid from Utah last year. kind of feel the same way about Taylor Rapp, the same way I feel about David Edwards. Like, they're starters right now in April, and very well, very well. They could be starters come week one. But like, I feel like when it comes to David Edwards, maybe Taylor Rapp too, although his money is a little more significant, I still feel like Brandon Beane is written that down in pencil and not pen. Or even if it's written in pen, at least it's not like in a black Sharpie. You know what I'm saying? With Cole Bishop, you get good size. He's 6'2", 206 pounds. He's a strong player. He can play at all three levels of the field. He's best at being closer to being in the box, versatile, interchangeable. Though I wouldn't love him as much if he was playing on the field back there with Rapp at the same time. But, who knows how they use Rapp and new addition Mike Edwards and Bishop. What I do know, or at least I strongly suspect, is that Sean McDermott is hardly married to Mike Edwards or Taylor Rapp for that matter. Bishop is like this heat-seeking missile, man. Physical guy, man. He plays strong as hell. It seems like he's got a ton of room to grow too, so you can kind of really work and develop him. He doesn't need to come in and start. Hell, he doesn't even need to play much right away. Maybe he could see some time in that, that like Jordan Poyer dime roll that they use in certain situations. Ultimately, I certainly think he could be better than Taylor Rapp, which I'm not a Taylor Rapp hater, but I'm also not very high on Taylor Rapp. So maybe you draft Bishop, which, by the way, I'd say a day 2 guy, probably either day 2, very early day 3, round 3, very early round 4. I know in PFF mock drafts, he always seems to be there early in round 4, but I think he might go a little bit earlier than that in real life. But anyway, this is a dude that I just see him long term. Maybe you develop him for a year. And then after a year, he's better than Taylor Rapp. Then maybe you move on from Taylor Rapp after this year if that's what you want to do. I just feel like he's a starting caliber safety in the NFL. Gotten ridden that all over him. Feels like a guy, like I said, he can go as early as late second. Like that might be the ceiling for him, but no later than early fourth. So anyway, there's him. I know everyone wants to hear about wide receivers, so let's get there now. I got 2. Jalen Polk from Washington is definitely one of them. As much as it make some Bills fans cringe, got to say this. The possibility that Buffalo goes somewhere other than wide receiver in the first round, and then they they take an edge or guard or defensive tackle, something like that, and they cornerback, who the hell knows? Safety. You get what I'm saying here. You go somewhere else in the first round, and then you're going to look for one in round 2 or even round 3. I feel like that's at least not popular, but realistic. I do. I really think it is. I think it's realistic. I think the Bills, I think Brandon Beane, I think this staff could say, you know what? I really like this wide receiver class. And I like who we have now, but we need to add. But you know what? I think we can add on day 2. I really love this edge. And this is a thin position. I really love the fact that I could go get me a surefire starter at guard right off the bat. Or Cooper DeJean, your utility knife defensive back. Man, I love that guy. I can't believe he's there. I think it is very realistically possible that the Bills go somewhere else other than wide receiver, which then that brings you to day 2. Jalen Polk, 6'2", 204 pounds. He fits that like kind of classic X-boundary receiver, if that's what the Bills are even looking for. He'll remind you a little bit of Gabe Davis in that he's a limited route runner. He doesn't really have that like entire route tree, or so it seems anyway, from what I've read and learned about him. But dude is productive as hell, man. The fact he got over 1,150 yards receiving last year at Washington with Rome Odunze on the same field as him, that's pretty impressive. Not to mention 9 touchdowns. I mentioned Gabe Davis in that he may be a little limited with routes, but he's also similar to Gabe Davis, and he's a pretty damn good and willing run blocker. Unlike Gabe, dude's got outstanding hands. He don't drop shit. He's definitely a little more of a developmental guy. Like it might take him some time to get up to NFL speed. So I'm not sure if this is a guy you draft and then you expect him to go out there and play 60, 70% of the snaps in week one of his rookie year. But I feel like his upside is really tremendous. Man, if the Bills are going to go double dipping at wide receiver, and even if you're a fan and you insist on wide receiver in round one, if they do that, if they go get name the guide, what does it matter? Mitchell, McConkey, whoever. You go get a guy in round one, and then you want to double dip, and you come back and you get Jalen Polk. Oh, this guy would be the perfect guy on the back end of a Buffalo Bills receiver double dip. I feel like it's a guy who goes as early as the second half of round two, and maybe at worst, one of the first like 10 guys off the board in round three at the very latest. I'm pretty high on him. Second receiver, Javon Baker from UCF. I'm as high on him. I'm not as high on him as Bruce Nolan. I'm not sure that anybody is. We had him in our first mock draft, and Bruce was literally having a coronary. This is going back 3 or 4 weeks, hoping that Javon Baker, because we kept resisting trades, hoping that Javon Baker would be on the board at 60. Turns out that he was, and Bruce was emphatic about drafting him, and we did. So anyway, that was a couple weeks ago. I'm not sold from what little I've learned about Javon Baker that he's like a bona fide NFL starter. But one thing I'm confident in is he can bring some big plays to this offense. UCF last year, 5 catches, at least 50 yards, part of his 52 catch, nearly 11 or nearly 1,200-yard campaign at UCF. By the way, many of you will remember, same school that the Buffalo Bills once plucked Gabe Davis from in the 4th round of the draft. UCF used him plenty on quick passes, those screens, the bubble screens, gave him yards after catch opportunities, which is something that the Bills have mostly sucked at in recent years, or maybe for eternity, for that matter. Not a blazer, ran a 4.5, 4.40 at the combine, but he's quick, pretty big. Again, we're not talking instant day one starter here. He ain't no plug and play receiver. I don't think he is anyway. But he could be a good player in this league. And I wouldn't be surprised if he went off the board on day 2. Now, again, Bruce took him round 260 a couple weeks ago. Recent mocks, looking at some of the experts, really don't see him much at all on day 2, or I'm sorry, round 2. But you never know. But you go round 3 for sure. The only thing I don't like about Baker is if the Bills take him, he's probably the 4th, maybe even 5th receiver on this roster to start. And unless he can get coached up as a rookie, playing special teams is something that he didn't do in college. So if you're drafting a receiver and he's definitely not going to be a starter right off the bat, it's tough to have that 4th, 5th receiver on your team not play any special teams. So we'll see what happens with that. But man, I just feel like he'd be the perfect, if not Jalen Polk at least, the perfect of 2 receivers. If the Bills take 2 receivers in this draft and Javon Baker is the second one, I'd be ecstatic. Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle, Ohio State. I actually want to read a quick blurb from Dane Brugler at The Athletic about him. And it's because it's really resonated with me. He says this, overall, Hall was more of a flash player than consistent force, but his quick twitch, movements, and natural energy are the ingredients of a disruptive gap penetrator. If he stays healthy, he will be an immediate rotation player, an eventual starting 3 tech tackle, and a 4-man front. I say that I wanted to read that and it resonated with me for one reason. Because I'm like, oh boy, that sure sounds a lot like a Jordan Phillips description, doesn't it? Now, most projections have Hall Jr. a second rounder or a very early 3rd round draft pick, and I'd agree. Assuming he'd even still be there, I feel like the Bills, if they wanted him, they'd have to get him at 60. I don't think you could pass on him in 2 And he's definitely not going to be there in round 4. I shouldn't say definitely. He's very unlikely to be there in round 4. You'd have to do some real maneuvering if he'd even be there early in round 3 to go get him. So I know what a lot of people are saying. You say defensive tackle who is a 3-tech on day 2. Like, huh? Why in the world would you even consider a 3-tech defensive tackle so early when you already have an established starter like Ed Oliver, not just on your team, but locked up? And I would say this, because as long as Sean McDermott is the head coach of this football team, the depth at tackle and edge will always be significantly important. Always. Backups play 35 to 49% of the snaps here in Buffalo. Plus, you know, they have crap right now behind Ed at the position. I think Dwayne Washington or Dwayne Williams, I'm sorry, whoever it is, they just signed a veteran out there. I'm not going to count on him. So in my mind, they got no depth there behind Ed Oliver. And if he comes out, if Ed comes out, or if Ed goes down with an injury, the drop-off is going to be pretty remarkable. Plus, honestly, look, if Ed Oliver face plants in the playoffs, like he has the last 2 times the Bills been eliminated, give me a guy who can get out there and is capable of making something happen. I use that Jordan Phillips comparison with Michael Hall Jr. here. As much as Jordan Phillips aggravated the hell out of me at times and just inconsistent, not to mention couldn't stay healthy, would take some dumb penalties. I liked having him on this team. I really did, because he was a very capable player. I feel the same way about Hall. Hall came onto my radar back in 2022. He absolutely dominated my Notre Dame offensive line that game. I'm a big Notre Dame fan. If you didn't know that, I watch all the games. And I kept saying at the time, like, who the hell is this dude? They can't block him. It was Michael Hall Jr. I remember that game sticks out to me. Just a big fan of this guy's potential. And again, on a lot of teams, I wouldn't even consider a guy on day 2 who ain't going to be the starter, not just this year, but anytime soon, as long as injuries aren't a factor for Ed Oliver. But again, you're talking Buffalo, you're talking Sean McDermott, you're talking Sean McDermott's philosophy is just different. And for that reason, he'd be a really good addition to this defense. All right, I got 2 more to throw at you here. I mentioned Notre Dame. Both of these are Notre Dame guys. One of them, a linebacker, J.D. Bertrand from Notre Dame. Now, look, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I try my best. I do my research. I study. I treat the NFL draft at times almost like I'm in college and it's a class. I'm taking a course and I want to get better at it. I study real hard, but I can't sit here and pretend that I know a million things about dozens of prospects coming into this draft. Generally, it's just not my thing. Like I said, I rely on watching, as many highlights on guys that I hear about as I can. I rely on reading up on them. I put heavy stock sometimes into people's opinions who I trust and who I value. But I do know a thing or two when it comes to Notre Dame players, because again, I watch all their games, like all their games. They're my squad. They're my Buffalo Bills of college football. And I like J.D. Bertrand. He's very likely not an NFL starter. Like, he has limitations for sure. I've been frustrated many times watching him play in Notre Dame. He gets tied up in blocks more often than I like. He's not a great athlete. Like I said, he definitely has limitations, but he's a smart cat. He is a smart football player. He is a leader. He was a captain at Notre Dame, which is no small thing, man. It's not. Really solid fundamentally. Doesn't make dumbass mistakes. Pretty good special teams player too, so you could trust him. And again, if you're not talking starter or a guy who's going to play a ton, special teams matter, and he's a very capable special teams player. For a day 3 guy, a guy who's likely going to go in the 5th round, maybe even the 6th round, I think he'd be a steal. The type of depth that he can bring to the Buffalo Bills. In fact, he kind of reminds me a little bit, in some ways at least, of Tyrel Dodson, and we saw last year how important having a guy like Tyrel Dodson could be to your football team when injuries come up, and they do come up. Maybe you combine him with Dorian Williams, and you have the makings of a really good young linebacking depth on this team. I know the Bills signed Nicholas Morrow. I think that's his name from Philly this offseason. I don't care, though. That means nothing to me as things stand right now. I think JD would be a fit, a good day 3 addition to this roster. I'm telling you, he's got really strong leadership qualities, and that matters. I mean, it matters on 31 other teams too, but it just feels like it really matters on the Bills. Man, I'd love to get that dude on day 3. And then the last guy, also again, a Notre Damer, Audric Estime, running back, big ass boy. Holy shit, man. Grown ass man, whatever you want to call him. 5'11, 227 pounds. Yeah, 227. Runs like a beast between the tackles. Loved him at Notre Dame. Ran for over 1,300 yards and 18 scores last year. Also gets the ball in the backfield, at least a little bit when asked to. Has got his shortcomings. Seems like all these running backs in this class do. No real true polished, surefire running backs in this year's class. So he's got his. Quite possibly it'll push him down to day 3 as well. It's not really fast, especially by NFL standards. Ran just a 4.71 at the combine. He's not a finesse guy at all. He's not going to make a lot of people miss in the open field. Not all that elusive. Honestly, you know who he reminds me a lot of? Latavius Murray. And I could totally see him in that role, especially since, I should have mentioned this. He could be a third down running back out there when the Bills are throwing, who could be a really good run blocker. He certainly got the size for it, right? Or pass blocker, I'm sorry. The Bills are set at running back right now. They got James Cook. You got Ty Johnson. But Estime, he'd be a really good third back at worst. And like I said, he could fill that Latavius Murray role quite nicely. And so we're clear, because maybe, I got a little bit of a touch of Fighting Irish bias here, but I think he could be a lot more than just a third back too. He's extremely capable of being a good, not a great, but a good player in the NFL. And I know, like the NFL draft experts out there when it comes to running back and day 2, maybe day 3 picks, talk about Brandon Allen, talk about Jalen Wright, those spots a lot more than Audric, my guy. But I think some of the gurus may be sleeping on him a little bit. By the way, let's see. He's only 20 years old. So anyway, long story short, I'd love to have him in Buffalo. Give me that young Latavius Murray who has the potential and the ability to grow into something more. And on that note, that is going to do it for this longer than I thought going to be solo episode here of Talking Buffalo. I had a lot to say, though, man. 8 guys that are not first rounders that you really like. That's a lot of ground to cover. Not to mention, of course, the big Buffalo sports news, and it is big news here in Buffalo. Don Granato getting fired, obviously, will be on top of any developments that go on with that. And of course, again, tonight, tomorrow night, depending on when you're consuming this podcast, I will be live. Imperial Pizza certainly going to dive into Sabres talk with my man, Fairburn. We're going to get some Bills talk in too, though. I mean, he did cover the Buffalo Bills for The Athletic as well. And I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to talk a little football as well. So anyway, thank you very much for listening. Be back. Brand new show tomorrow.